Okay, so hello everyone and welcome to this session, which is a part of the SCCJR annual festival. And this is a session primarily devoted to teaching. Rachel has kindly started recording already. So I don't have to do that, which is brilliant. My name is Milena Tripkovic, for those of you who don't know me, and I'm a lecturer at the University of Edinburgh, Edinburgh Law School. This session, as I said, which is primarily devoted to teaching, has been kind of motivated or inspired by my own experiences and if I may say, frustrations as well, that have to do with teaching criminology and the impact of the shifting definitions of what criminology is. And I have experienced these as both as a matter of having taught criminology from, and I counted this morning, from 2004 in various forms, but also I guess from the shifting and changing context in which I myself have thought. So ultimately I have started thinking consequently about a number of different issues that have to do with teaching criminology. And primarily those reflect the questions about what criminology is, so the definitions of criminology, how is what we teach in criminology same or different from how we conceive of criminology as a research area, and ultimately the question of why we teach criminology the way we do. Ultimately, we all have and we all make different choices in this regard. So I started wondering about how much is the way in which we teach criminology dependent on where we teach it, how much what we teach is connected to some kind of wider geographical and other types of context, and how much all of that kind of bears on the way we teach criminology the way we do. So as you can see, obviously, it's a very kind of wide thing or a wide issue that I would like us to discuss today. And obviously some of the problems and some of the things that we will discuss when we teach criminology are encountered in other areas as well. So they have to do with teaching methods, teaching approach, and teaching tools. But I feel like there is something very specific about criminology as kind of this meeting point for various disciplines. And I think that's something that we might want to talk about. So there's a very kind of flexible list of things that I have prepared, but it's a very kind of open conversation and all of your contributions are very much welcome. So the way I thought about this session is that we will spend about kind of 45 minutes talking among the list of our guests. And then we will have another 45 minutes to have an open discussion about everything with all of you who are participants. And obviously, if there's anything that comes to your mind and you think this is particularly important, I want to say this now, I can't wait for the 45 minutes to pass, just raise your hand and we'll let you in. And also, because it's a list of already 20 participants, and there are many of you that obviously all of you I'd like to hear from, anything that you want to say at any point, just raise your hand, and you're not obviously limited at all by the post topics, anything that pertains to teaching criminology and you think is important. We do want to hear it. Okay, so our four participants are, sorry, literally from all over the world. I'm from kind of Scotland. I live in England and I'm originally from Serbia. And we have four participants from four different countries. We have Kate Lowe from the University of Hong Kong, obviously from Hong Kong. We have Mojca Plesnicar, who is from the University of Ljubljana in Slovenia. We have Maximo Sozzo, who is from the National University of Litoral. And we have Umidjon Tashimov, who is from the Tashkent State University of Law from Uzbekistan. So thank you so much for our guests for agreeing to participate. I know that for some of you, it's early morning. For the others, it's very late in the evening, but thanks in any case for making the time in your day to come. Okay, so as I say, I think we've kind of covered a pretty big part of the world, so I think that's actually very nice. So if I can just start by asking our guests to tell us briefly what it is that they teach. I mean, I can start that as well, because I think it's really interesting to kind of see what things people teach, how they're connected to criminology, and then kind of try to connect that to what they say later on. So I'm, by background, a lawyer who's taught criminology from day one, and I've taught various different things that are associated to criminology, most recently things that have to do with global and transnational criminology, but I also taught black letter law for a really big part of my career. So I think overall I've taught probably 10 different subjects, and that's probably the the reason for my frustration, because and that's one of the things I want to discuss. We can't really know all of the things that we teach equally well, and criminology itself is a kind of a subject that in itself encapsulates a lot of different subjects and different approaches. So can I ask maybe Katie, what is your field of teaching?
Yeah, sure. So I work in the Center for Criminology here at Hong Kong U. At the moment, I don't have a teaching position. I'm actually in a postdoctoral, so it's largely based on writing, but historically I've been a TA in Introduction to Criminology, Crime and Media. I've also delivered guest lectures around kind of my specialist subject, which is drug use and supply here in Hong Kong and wider Asia. I've also taught on the master's program with regards to criminological methods, and then also on the kind of PhD program with regards to methods. In particular, my research focused on ethnographic methods too. Okay, brilliant. Thank you.
Mojca.
Yeah, hi everyone. So my background is legal as well, and I now work at the Institute of Criminology, but teach various courses at the University of Ljubljana and in different faculties. So this is maybe another aspect to talk about how to teach different students criminology. But I've taught undergraduate courses in criminology, graduate courses in criminology, doctoral courses in criminology. I now teach penology, and I often give like guest lectures or whatever in procedural law, procedural penal law as well. And since my research crosses over into sociology and sociology and law, whatever, the whole field that I can hardly name in itself, I've also taught law and sociology in our undergraduate years, and law and psychology as well. So I'm like widespread, and I share your frustration, Milena.
I know you do. Thank you. Okay, Umidjon, what is your field of teaching?
I'll teach basically criminal justice and advocacy. So here in Tashkent State University of Law, basically we'll teach law courses and partially criminology courses. For now, we have a problem as criminology courses has been annulled from our syllabus. So for now, I just teach criminal justice, and I just started my academic career in 2020.
Good, thank you. So yeah, you're already kind of picking on the issues that I thought will be really important to discuss later on. So thanks for that introduction, Maximo. And now for something really different in terms of teaching, I guess.
Thank you, Milena, for the invitation, for being part of this session. I teach in undergraduate courses of law, but also sociology, social work, and political science, a course on theoretical criminology. But I also teach a course on sociology and law and society for law students. And we have also a master program in criminology, and there I teach some courses related with theoretical criminology. And also I teach punishment and criminal justice.
Okay, great. So I think it's a very kind of good overview of the different things that we might define as criminology, or at least related to criminology. And I guess maybe the first question could then be, how do we kind of handle this pressure to teach a course which is in itself very interdisciplinary, because obviously we have specific backgrounds in specific fields. And if we are very lucky, we might have these kind of dual degrees, or have, you know, an undergraduate degree in something and then a master's in something else, and then a PhD in a third thing. But inevitably, even if we are lucky to have that, there will be constant pressures to kind of expand our knowledge and expand our understanding of what we might want to teach and we might need to teach. I constantly have this problem with, you know, all of a sudden I see a journal article that talks about, I don't know, developmental criminology or media, and I become insecure because I know that's something that I need to learn and something I need to know, but I know that our, you know, abilities are very limited. How do you handle this? Do you have any kind of particular strategies, or are there any things that you try to do to resolve this problem or this pressure?
Can I, yeah, shall I start? Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think one of my first, when I first came towards the problem that you're now describing was when I was starting my PhD, and I saw a tweet, I forgot by whom, but it was one of the like criminologists that were already established at the time. And he said, whoever is not teaching about the kids for money cash is not doing criminology right. And the kids for money cash was like a scandal in the, I don't know, 2010-ish, sometime somewhere at that point, about judges in the US. Two judges in the US basically sending kids to a correctional facility in exchange for money from that correctional facility. And it was the first time that it hit me that actually criminology is not going to stay what I thought it was, but it's rather expanding and going way beyond what I was taught in my early courses. But then at the other end of the lecturing table, I think basically the hours that you are allowed to teach are one of the limits in itself. You cannot go beyond what you need to say, and at some point like everything you want to say gets rationalized to what you're able to say in the time that you have, and you need to cover the basics. If you don't cover the basics, you can't really expand on that. So what I try to do is, when you have a core criminology course, I try to stick to the classics, basically, to what we learned, to the texts that we know and love and cherish, and then expand on them, maybe in assignments that you give to the students, and try to actualize them, give them some sort of context that they understand. Or go beyond that in other courses that are more focused and specific and elective. So, for example, if you have a criminology course that's separate to the criminology course, or like a punishment course, you do more punishment there, and you just basically do the bare minimum of punishment in the core criminology course, I think.
Yes, I think there is a level of frustration that also emanates from what you think criminology is and what you're going to teach and what the students expect you to teach, which is always much more kind of, a larger than life expectation about what criminology is and what's going to happen in the seminar. And then, you know, once they kind of encounter various criminological theories, and they're just thinking, oh no, this is not what I want. This is not what I expected. Katie, I saw you shaking your head. Did you have any thoughts about this?
Yeah, I can definitely echo that. I think, you know, we only have 12 weeks here in Hong Kong, so it's not a lot of time to even cover the basis with regards to criminological theory. I think one of the things I drawed upon when you guys were introducing yourself is it seems as though criminology sits in the law department.
Yep.
Or has kind of strong affiliations for you guys with the law department. For ours, our Centre for Criminology sits in sociology and in social sciences. So I can definitely, I think my thoughts really echo. We tend to have really clear definitions, particularly in Introduction to Criminology, as to what we are going to achieve in those 12 weeks and what we're not going to achieve. And I tend to find that really manages students' expectations. We also, again, tend to be very theoretically driven, and then we allow students to really explore probably the kind of, sexier issues, right? The hashtag Me Too, the more important issues, then in assignments through a theoretical lens, enabling them to kind of gain that passion or engage with things that might have drawn them to that core criminology course. Another thing, again, just to echo, we really kind of highlight to our students that if they have found the Introduction to Criminology course really interesting. You know, we have other courses on top of that, including crime and media, visual criminology, which is something we've just rolled out this year, criminological methods. We have a master's program in criminology too, but I completely agree with you. There's only a certain amount you can achieve within 12 weeks. And as much as we need to manage our expectations, we try as much as possible to manage the students' expectations too.
Thank you, Katie.
In our case in Latin America, I think that in general in Latin America, but particularly in Argentina, we have a very strong divide between teaching in undergraduate courses and teaching graduate courses. So since you have students in the graduate programs that have selected criminology to do an MA, and MAs here in Argentina are very long, so it takes you 2 years in order to do an EMA. So there you have one kind of, let's say, student, and you can confront this kind of problems, Milena, in a different way, because you have a lot of other courses in the MA program. But teaching in the law undergraduate program or in the sociology undergraduate program, it's much more complex, because you only have these 14 weeks in our case of this single course in the entire program. So they do not have another, let's say, instances or moments in which they can go deeper in some key areas. So you have to do the basic, as Katie said, but at the same time you have to tell the students that there are many open areas to do research today that they can in some way explore in the future, but they have to do it in the graduate program they select, but not inside the undergraduate program.
Okay, yeah, so Milena is saying, I agree with Katie, it's so hard to really properly teach criminological theory in her case, 10 weeks, especially when there's something new every week, obviously. Umidjon, can I ask you to maybe just, you mentioned something that I wanted to discuss, which is connected to this. How much is what you teach as criminology or criminal justice determined by the kind of anticipated professional careers of your students? So how much is that kind of what you teach accommodated to the expectation of what they will go to do one day?
In our case, criminology and criminal justice is also would be teach between 10 to 12 weeks, and so students basically would love to have some practical knowledge rather than some theoretical. And what we receive from the kind of law enforcement agencies, kind of criticism towards academia to teaching kind of abstract concepts rather than being precise and giving students what they will need in their career. So that's one of the main problems. And besides that, we have a problem to kind of sort of finding sources, because post-Soviet criminology is limited only with kind of Soviet theories of crime, and we live in the country with low income. There is some economical pressure to getting some subscription from various libraries on textbooks and purchasing some fundamental textbooks where students and as well as academics can find some insights what they teach on the concept, on various concepts on criminology and criminal justice as well.
Yeah, I think that kind of brings it really close to home to me, because I taught in Serbia for 5 years, and then I kind of moved abroad, and I could see the impact of just having more resources on the way in which I researched criminology and what I thought criminology was. So I completely understand that. I think it's also a matter of, if I can just try to link two things together, the question of what kind of a project criminology is in particular, or the teaching of criminology, and where it stands, as Katie said. For some, it sits within the law departments, for others within social policy or sociology. And I think that probably determines very much how criminology is taught and what purpose it serves. I remember when I used to teach in Serbia, I taught within the law faculty, and it was 2 semesters. The first semester would be just criminological theory, literally everything. The students would be green in the face by the time it was done. But then the second semester was devoted to teaching criminology, but with a very particular point of view. So we would teach students about particular crimes, but those crimes kind of responded to the, let's say, chapters of the criminal code. So we'd start, from murders and then go on. So it was very much kind of attuned to what the state wanted the students to learn about criminal offenses from a criminological perspective. Mojca, does that resonate with you at all? Or
I mean, it used to be the same way when I was studying, and when we were starting out. It has changed dramatically, I guess, in the past decade or so. And we've had some of what Umidjon is saying, trying to steer to be more practically oriented, to give tangible content to students that they can use. I understand the tendency. I also hate the tendency really strongly, because it often led you to think that things that are theoretical are not important, which is, totally not true. It also tends to focus. We've had, like, our criminology course when I was studying was what we are now saying, like a full year, 2 semesters, theories, and then sort of criminal justice in a way. And now we've ended with an elective, 1 semester elective course, which shows the way where we're going with this. We have a doctoral course, but we don't have a master's course, for example, which I'm not sure is a good or a bad thing. That's different. When you come from a very small country, you don't really need that many master's criminologists, to be fair. But there is this tendency, and I really dislike it, to go towards what's practical and what's useful in a way. And I think much more is useful than we think it is. And it comes back from the students when we discuss topics that they wouldn't usually think about. They often are more energized by them. It makes them think, and they come back to me and say, well, I thought about that, and I figured something or whatever. And sometimes they do figure something, sometimes they don't. But I think making them think is what we should aim for. Sorry, I strayed away a bit.
No, I agree completely. I also see this tendency, I mean, that both you and Umidjon mentioned, of kind of reducing the importance of criminology as an academic subject, because it's seen as if it's not, it doesn't have apparent purpose or meaning other than kind of, enriching our theoretical understanding, but it doesn't have this kind of practical purpose, which is very often pursued by law faculties. Maximo, what is the aim of teaching criminology in terms of what is the professional aspiration of the students?
I think it varies quite a lot in Latin America in general, and in Argentina also in particular, because I think that this, as Mojca said, it's quite connected with more general trends in the relationship between universities and the state and public policies in general. So we have now some programs in the country, in Argentina, in MA programs in criminology that have clearly an orientation towards an official criminology or administrative criminology, with a huge, let's say, orientation towards producing professionals to the institutions of the state. And we also have these other kind of programs that come from a more critical tradition and that are more oriented towards research. We don't have, as for example in many other countries, a formal distinction between professional masters and research masters, but in practice something like that is happening. So this, let's say, more administrative, more oriented towards administrative criminology, are more oriented towards building professionals for the public policies, and these other MA programs are producing more professionals that will develop their careers in the academic field, doing research or teaching criminology. And in fact, as in comparison between Slovenia and Argentina, we don't have a PhD program. We only have 5 MA programs in the entire country on criminology, but now we are building the first one in my university, the first PhD program, that in some ways trying to reinforce this orientation towards doing research and towards a more critical tradition.
Very good. Katie, did you have any thoughts? It's fine if you didn't.
No, I think it's really amazing actually, because I think everyone's undergraduates are much more disciplined than they are in Hong Kong U. I think some of the reasons when I speak to our undergraduates as to why they took criminology, most of them are really interested in serial killers, or they just finished watching Breaking Bad, or they find it absolutely fascinating. I think at Hong Kong U, we have a really great scheme actually with our undergraduates, where regardless of what discipline you are taking, you need to take 2 courses outside of your discipline. So we end up with like a real mixed bag, which I actually really enjoy teaching. It has its problems, and I'm happy to go into that in a different question, but we have like a real mixed bag of students. We have a lot of social sciences students. We have legal students that kind of especially want to go into the criminal law practice, that kind of want to delve more into criminal theory. We have scientists and nurses and medicine, students from medicine, students from engineering, so from every different department and faculty. And I think, they aren't necessarily, most of them aren't necessarily looking to go into the legal criminal world or become a policeman, particularly here in Hong Kong, given what we're currently going through at the moment, or move in that direction, but they're just more fascinated with the actual substance of the subject itself, which I think is really interesting to teach. That changes slightly when it goes into the master's program. So we do have a criminology master's here, and we tend to find that we get a lot more of kind of criminal justice agencies, social workers wanting to do a master's in criminology to gain kind of a further promotion, putting it really bluntly, within their own occupation. So we kind of have 2 tranches.
Yeah, so that was another question I think that we mentioned at the beginning. Who are the students whom we teach, right? It's in my experience, it was always lawyers predominantly, and I think that kind of impacts on the way you teach, because you know what the needs of the students are, and you can almost see how their attention shifts whenever they think, oh, this is what I need to know, this is what's going to be useful. So I think that's also an interesting thing. And we also have in the first year of criminology, majority are lawyers, but then it's open to everyone. So as you say, we sometimes have people from computer science who are just interested in the field. Can I ask you, Mojca, something which is kind of connected to what we've just discussed? And this is kind of, I'm asking you because I know you will have this particular knowledge. I think the kind of, one thing about kind of the way you not only research criminology, but also teach criminology, is dependent on a kind of a state surrounding that you might have, if I may say. And I think it's a similar situation in Scotland and Slovenia, both being fairly small jurisdictions, where the kind of the distance between you as an academic researcher and the policymakers is fairly short, right? Do you think that kind of makes any, does it have any impact on how you teach criminology? Obviously, I guess your answer would be equally important if when it comes to research, but does that have any bearing on how you teach as well? The fact that you kind of know that what you do might have impact or will have impact on policymaking.
Yeah, I mean, it would be crazy to say that it doesn't. I think everything we do outside of teaching also impacts on our teaching. The things that we know, the things that we learn outside, I think that can't, you can't just check it in at the door and leave it there. It definitely, once you start, this has only started to happen to me when I start seeing my former students at some sort of position that I wouldn't expect them to, because I've just really started teaching there. It makes you think that actually what you might be doing has actual practical relevance in the real world outside of your classroom. You're educating people who are going to do some of them menial tasks, but some of them really important things for the future of your country and yourself included. And it does. I've seen myself reconsider the topics that I need to cover. I've worked with judges a lot, partly due to the fact that we are a small country, and if you're an academic, you need to be engaged in the society as well. You can't just leave it be. And partly because it's my own stance on things and life and academic teaching. But so I've worked with judges quite a lot, and I see how much they're lacking in some and seeking knowledge, not just lacking, but also seeking knowledge in psychology, for example, or in some basic things that we think should be known, but are really not known, and specifically not given in our curriculum. So I've decided quite consciously to incorporate some of the aspects of decision making, for example, in my courses, regardless of which course it is, to be fair, precisely because I think that's something that should be addressed. And I feel kind of good about it. I don't feel like I'm making an arbitrary choice. It's actually a knowledgeable decision that I'm making, an educated decision. Based on what I'm experiencing in practice, I think.
I remember once, that reminded me of my kind of from previous lifetime teaching in Serbia, where it would happen very often that I would take students into prisons, and afterwards they would just say, well, I know I'm not going to be a judge because I don't want to be responsible for any of that. So it's kind of, it does have very practical impact on the decisions perhaps that they will make once. Any other thoughts on that, of kind of what Mojca was talking about?
I think I've seen it on a few occasions on the master's program, because we do have a lot of police, particularly at a certain level, coming in to kind of broaden their understanding of criminology. And they tend to come with, as you naturally would if you've gone down that line, a really narrow legal focus on what a crime is and how crimes are made. And it's been really lovely to kind of broaden that or present some different alternative arguments to that. It's nice to see those really lovely aha moments. And I think that that's really important. Whether or not they take that on and use that on a daily basis is different. I've also seen it from my perspective when I've been presenting on like my ethnographical research on drug use and supply, and kind of talking particularly here about harm reduction. When police officers and people working in like social work, for example, have kind of not really been exposed to those different types of narratives, just because they're not predominant narratives here within Hong Kong. I mean, we're getting there, but they're not. And I think that that's something that I've really enjoyed. Again, whether or not that's broadened or had real world repercussions, I'm not too sure, but I think it's really important for us to be at least discussing and presenting those arguments outside of the common narrative within those certain disciplines.
Great, thank you. Maximo.
In our case, we, particularly at the MA program, we usually have as students people who is already part of one of the criminal justice institutions, for example, as a prosecutor, or a judge or a public defender. And also we usually have students that come from some state agencies that are involved in monitoring prison conditions. We have here some sort of federal ombudsman on the Federal Prison Service, and we have a lot of students coming from that institution. And I think that in the effects could be very different, and I am not so sure about real life effects in their decisions and practices in the everyday work, but in some occasions you can see some fertilization of the MA program in their own practices, because they are building new things, and that's fantastic. It's very, very interesting. But in the case of the undergraduate programs, I don't see a strong connection in that direction in our case, in which, as I have previously said, it's only one theoretical criminology course for the lawyers, that the future lawyers that have 5 years of different courses in other directions. So I don't see a lot of, let's say, strength in this direction.
Umidjon, what about you? Are your students predominantly just students, or are they already kind of criminal justice professionals or professionals in other ways?
Basically, I teach undergraduate students, so they are students, and there's widespread perception about criminal justice agencies, particularly students will tend to be kind of they want to be prosecutors or judges, predominantly prosecutors, because there was a Soviet pattern in which prosecution had huge power to make decision. So if you read some articles about post-Soviet criminology, there is arguments about the rate of acquittals in the courts. So there is the low rate of acquittals, and this is because the power of law enforcement agencies, in particular prosecution. So I think what we teach perhaps may influence choices of our students. So I'll teach them to choose more kind of advocacy side of law rather than being a prosecutor. And so there is a tendency that now students are more tend to be choose kind of legal practice rather than being kind of to work in law enforcement side of legal practice.
Okay, so would you say that, which is kind of, I think, perhaps the next topic, that the way you teach and what you teach, I feel like, is very much determined by where you teach, right? The geographical context is very determinative of your of the teaching materials or teaching approaches, I guess, as well.
Definitely, yeah.
Okay, so I think that was kind of one of my impressions, is that when I kind of moved from one place to another, I felt that the purpose of my teaching changed immensely and enormously, and kind of what I was trying to instill in students was very different, because I felt like in Serbia it was mostly about learning, and that's kind of the teaching style as well, learning about things, not really thinking about how you will use them, just, you know, use it and use the law in particular circumstances, and that's it. Whereas in the UK, the idea is to develop critical skills of students much more, and that obviously impacts on how you teach and how you kind of how you try to do this. But can I ask you, maybe Maximo, I'm going to target you immediately, about, there is a whole big discussion about decolonizing criminology and kind of listening to voices from other parts of the world. So what are some of the kind of the insights that you think are the most important in that regard? And I say this is a huge topic, and obviously we're not going to get to the bottom, but...
Yes, it is huge. Well, I think that in the case of, you know, places like Argentina or Latin American countries, that we are clearly on the global south end of this divide. In some way, you know, decolonizing or southernizing criminology was part of the thing just from the beginning. I mean, from the 80s, in which in that moment in which criminology started to grow again in Latin American countries after, you know, the golden age of positivistic criminology at the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century. So in some way, these attempts to southernize, decolonize theoretical debates, problems, concepts, arguments, was part of the enterprise of building a new space in the academic world for criminology from the beginning. But probably in the last, let's say, 10, 15 years, in connection with this huge debate, global debate, you can see, let's say, more presence of these attempts, the deliberate attempts to look at things differently, to interrogate more critically northern intellectual production, that is evolving quite a lot in the teaching of criminology, both in the undergraduate and the graduate courses. And this is also connected with more, let's say, local materials used to teach as readings. You know, when we teach in general in Latin America theoretical criminology courses, we constantly use, you know, the main authors of the criminological theory produced in the north. So and you know, to question this and try to in some way avoid reproducing the idea that the only criminological thought that is relevant is the one produced in a handful of countries of the global north is of course really important. And I think that now it's being more crucial in how the people do things in this particular context of the global south.
So that's great, thank you. I was just kind of wondering, once you kind of cross into global north and you try to do the same thing, right? You encounter numerous difficulties, and I think the whole kind of discussion about decolonizing is, in my perception at least, is that people are very willing to do that. The problem is they don't know how, they don't have the tools, and they're extremely insecure. So if I were to teach, you know, if I were to bring in voices from the south or the east, I kind of encounter a situation whereby I'm extremely insecure about whether I'm doing it right. So I do, and I think it's extremely important for students to understand that. And sometimes they appreciate just the, even if you can't provide a comprehensive account of what is happening in other places, even just the details or, you know, just small things, they very much appreciate, because they like to hear how things are done in different places. So Katie, you had some ideas about how to do some of these things.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm in Hong Kong, and you know, the majority of theory that we work with does come from the north, so we do need to give us those papers to read, putting it really bluntly. But we do try and supplement every reading with either kind of a local context or a local piece of research, or like a mainland China piece of research or something outside of our own jurisdiction. We also kind of really push that in assessments as well. So one of the ways in which we've done it is, for example, one of the midterms that we offer is a student can either listen to kind of an international kind of podcast, such as like Dr. Death or Dirty John, you know, some of the really big ones that are really trendy at the moment, which deal with kind of quite a modern topic, criminological content, and then we'll frame a question around that. And that kind of brings the international and it's from different countries. Another way in which we do it in the same, they can choose, is actually to choose really short, free to access documentaries, which look at a criminological, a crime or a deviant issue locally here in Hong Kong or mainland China. Examples of those can kind of be, thinking on my feet now, guys, match fixing at football matches, which is quite prevalent here, a form of gambling, and gambling's pretty much illegal in Hong Kong, various, apart from horses and matchsticks, or alternatively like violence amongst domestic helpers here in Hong Kong. And we find that students are really engaged and hungry, if they are local students or mainland Chinese students, to apply criminological theory in a local context from them. And even our international students are really hungry to understand how these various different theories resonate into the country which they're spending 2 or 3 months with. So we found that that's struck a really nice balance. The downside of that, as there always is with these things, is sometimes they can really kind of get stuck in the weeds with regards to kind of the sensationalism of the topic, rather than kind of getting ingrained in the theoretical perspective of what we're trying to achieve.
Mojca, Umidjon, any thoughts on, are there any attempts made to kind of integrate?
I think I'm technically part of the North, but I very much don't feel part of the North.
It becomes very confusing because you don't know.
Exactly. But on the other hand, I come from a country where the criminological tradition is really, really strong. The Institute of Criminology in Ljubljana is one of the oldest institutes of criminology in the world. It began in the 50s. So there's a really strong tradition. And there has been a lot of research that was very original, a lot of ideas that were quite original. So I think we would be fine, teaching criminology just within our own limits, if we wanted to. But I think the world, especially in the past 2 decades, I think, or that's where I've been paying attention, I guess, has come much closer, and the issues that sometimes I felt were really remote to us, and this is just something happening in the US and it has totally no bearing on what's happening here. This has somehow stopped being true, because at one point or another, I know, prison privatization that felt completely impossible was at one point proposed by one of our politicians as an option, because it works somewhere else, and you need to start addressing that preemptively, really, because politicians or someone else is going to bring in ideas that we might like or might not like, but need to be equipped and need to equip people to think about and consider beforehand, I think. So I think it is hard to strike a good balance between teaching local and global issues, and things coming from the south and things coming from the north. And I think it's really super important to actually just acknowledge that there is a difference between criminologists coming from different places. But it is important to include different viewpoints, either through tutorials, I think someone said in the chat, or through assignments that you give, just to, as you said, to make them think about different perspectives that are possible on same issues.
Yeah, and I can kind of confirm that there is a kind of a cascade of events also within a smaller region of at least the former Yugoslavia, where you kind of, the Slovenians are the ones doing something, let's see what they're doing and, how they're doing things. So there's definitely that kind of regional aspect sometimes that...
no pressure, right?
Definitely. Umidjon, did you have any thoughts on that?
So Southernizing criminology is of really significant importance, because there is, as Uzbekistan, one of the Muslim majority countries around the world, there is some ideas about abolishing kind of imprisonment from Muslim perspective, as there was and hasn't been any kind of punishment which is related to kind of confining person. So we have to look at some ideas which sheds light on how punishment is perceived in Muslim majority countries, and how maybe some colonial rules or imperial rules impacted kind of the way they will use or they will employ punishment in the context.
Very good. Would you say that these kinds of discussions do reach the students as well, or does that kind of remain?
Yeah, I'm trying to kind of discuss with my students how we understand punishment, even though there is a kind of transfer legal system from former Soviet Union, but there is in societal level perception is kind of grounded to Muslim ideology and religion. So in the Soviet period, there was prohibition to talk about or kind of practice religion, but as there was the solution of the Soviet Union, the ideas of Muslim ideas has been kind of revived.
Okay, good. Thank you. I just, Milena wrote in the chat box, and I think this was about kind of insecurities about teaching, teaching of other things outside of the particular jurisdiction, the kind of the insecurity. I really want to, but I really feel insecure, and that's what I try to do in my tutorials, at least give examples of other contexts. Okay, so since we're kind of reached the first 45 minutes, maybe just one last thing, one brief question that I had was about kind of the mobility and what we gain from being mobile teachers, if we are able. But I think this doesn't only relate to kind of physical mobility, which obviously is limited in recent times, but also about some of the more imaginative things in which we might kind of try to cross boundaries by inviting people to participate in our seminars, or trying to link with people to invite them to be guest lecturers. Have you tried to experiment with some of these, and have they been fruitful, would you say? Is there a benefit in trying to do that?
in our case, we, since, I don't know, 6 or 7 years, every year we organize a winter school in which we invite people from abroad our country, from other countries, both from the global north and also from Latin America. And we have 5 days of very intensive activities with all these professors. And it's really a fantastic experience. I really think it's very, very important for our students. And they have the experience of, having to discuss with professors with very, very different trajectories and backgrounds and working on different contexts of the world. And I think that opens a lot of possibilities. And I think it's a very valuable experience. Of course, in the last 2 years, we didn't do it because of the COVID-19 pandemic, but I think it's a very interesting way of producing this kind of connection. And also we ask professors not to teach one lecture, but at least 3 or 4. So they have really the experience of discussing with students. And of course it has a lot of problems. For example, one is language, because we speak in Spanish and not everybody of our students could speak in English or listen in English well. So you have some challenges, like, for example, how you get some money in order to get simultaneous translation for some of the professors, and there are different problems, but I think that it's really, really an interesting experience. Let's see if we continue to do it.
Yeah, Julie, please take note. This is something that we were discussing as we were preparing for this session, about the kind of the predominant language of all of these kind of online encounters organized in the global north being English, and how much that's an obstacle, potentially not to academics, but to students definitely, and how much that's kind of limiting. Mojca, did you have any thoughts about that? Do you?
I'm hiding a bit because we're really lacking in this department. I mean, we do have the occasional guest lectures and the seminars where the students are invited to participate, but don't really come that often, to be fair. And I feel these guest lectures, as Maximo said, when you only have one, it's very focused, usually on some recent research or something, and it's not really a different approach to criminology. It's just presenting a person's work, which can be terribly interesting, but not in this pedagogical sense that we're talking about in criminology. And doing a short series of 3 lectures, this is a different stance, and this from the perspective that we're looking at now, gives an added value, I think, to the guest position of the person. And it would be like, in an ideal world, I would give a series of lectures to someone else, but then I still need to do my lectures as well, and give the content that we talked about at the beginning. So it's again a question of how do you practically do everything that you're supposed to do within the hours that the course is assigned. But I definitely think this idea of migration, either just the lecturer going abroad and bringing ideas back where they're lecturing students, or bringing actual people from the outside, the winter school or the summer schools or whatever kind of school of a series of seminars or lectures that you organize, sound brilliant, and a good way to approach these things, I think. And it is something that I think we as academics should consider as well, to sort of organize something that allows different perspectives, different viewpoints to come about how we think about criminology, and offer that to students as well.
I used to, at least, I mean, when I was a student, we at least used to have lectures by academics from the region. It was limited in what we could get because everything was fairly similar still. But I still vividly remember these lectures. I mean, I may have forgotten everything else, but I think this is something that really impacts on the students for a long time. Okay, Katie, Umidjon, if you have any final words, and I think.
Yeah, I don't really have too much to build on that. I think from our perspective, we try and bring in 1 or 2 guest lecturers within every course, but I completely echo, we have 12 weeks, so it is really tight. I think the approach that we take on Introduction to Criminology and undergraduate level is we try and push the concept of what students might think criminology is. So we'll bring someone in to speak about corporate crime, for example, because they're in that world of thinking about drugs or murder or theft. You know, we've had a brilliant guest lecturer, Emmeline Smith from Glasgow. She came over and talked about wildlife crime, which again was kind of a double hit because, you know, Hong Kong is a hub for ivory trading. So that was really great to have her there. So that's one approach that we've taken to guest lecturers.
Very good. Excellent. Umidjon.
Actually, students may find it's kind of inviting guest lectures very interesting, given that because when I invited Gavin Slade as a guest lecturer who has been doing kind of field work in Kazakhstan on kind of prison governance in former Soviet Union, students found it very interesting, and kind of it might be helpful to get the idea of kind of how prisons are governed and how informal order may impact kind of prison order in post-Soviet space. So it's a kind of relatively new phenomenon in post-Soviet Central Asia, but we're trying to kind of introduce it and trying to invite various speakers from all over the world.
Great. Mojca.
Just another thought on that specific question. If this stupid pandemic has taught us anything, is that we are actually much closer than we thought we were. And this inviting people from abroad and giving new voices to people from different places was usually traditionally connected to serious costs, the traveling, the accommodation, the time management and whatever. And we've learned now that actually it doesn't really have to be. And even though we all know that this virtual sort of events are not quite the same, I think that the trade-off is still a positive when you try to think about including people from other regions or other parts of the world. So it's not as hard as we thought it could be. Us conversing 3 years ago would have meant a whole lot of traveling and a whole lot of logistics, and now it's just a click. So
yes, it would have been impossible. I mean, I would have never had the guests, and I'm not even in Edinburgh. I'm in Birmingham. So yes, I definitely, as Katie says, it's a great point. Okay, thank you so much to our guests. And as I promised, with a 15-minute delay or 13-minute delay, I'll open the floor to questions and comments. Margaret, I saw your comment, but I wanted to invite you to just say something about it. And I see your hand was up, so please go ahead. You're muted. I'm seeing it. Margaret, you're still muted. Okay, yeah. Brilliant.
Yes, my hand was not up. I did a thumbs up on the comment.
Okay, great.
But I do actually have a comment and a question. I am not a criminologist, and my master's is in what is called Sabona, which is a new model of restorative justice, which I finished 10 years ago when I was 50 years old, which was 34 years after my father's murder here in Canada, very close to, but we are from Guyana, al lado de Argentina, very close to Argentina. But so my question is, in terms of inviting people to actually have a voice, I mean, have you invited people that have been victims of crime to actually be part of the conversation? I have been invited by many criminologists to go to their classes when we could fly, but I also give talks now. But have you considered that within your programs to make the personal and the professional linked with the political? That is what my great interest is in terms of bridging silos, you know. So thank you for this as well.
Yeah, I thought that was a good question. As I sit on the ethics committee, I'm always kind of ethical approval to get people to. But it's a great question. Does anyone? I I have never done that in my teaching, definitely. Anyone else?
I haven't had victims in my class. I have had ex-prisoners give some sort of their experience of what it meant to be in prison. And those are typically very well received by the students, and they give a different perspective. I'm also a bit wary of including victims, but not because I wouldn't think that that's worthy, but because of the ethics considerations. But I think if the victim is willing and wants to contribute, that should be fine as well. It's usually, though, harder, I think, to find victims willing to participate, at least in from my context. But to be fair, I haven't tried very much, so maybe I should.
I will tell you that I did meet one of my father's 3 murderers, and we did several talks together for a number of years. And then we'll just say he did something not kindred. But it did not change. This happened a few years ago, so I met him 34 years after he did murder Theodore. And then he did something subsequently that just destroyed the relationship, if you will, but did not change the fact that in terms of victims supporting people that are imprisoned, because a lot of people, of course, as we all know, that are in jail are also victims. That's why I asked that, and there's a victimology in this country. I'm in Canada at the moment. Yeah, it's just, I just wanted to throw it out there in terms of broadening. I teach global citizenship at Centennial College, and I do bring some of this content. Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for that question. Great. Any other questions or thoughts? If you can't find the hand up, I think it's among the reactions. I always have a problem. Yes, so if you go down between reactions, it says hand up, so. Or if you can just barge into the conversation, no problem.
Yeah. Why? Oh, sorry. There's Federico.
Yep. Okay, sorry. Go ahead, Federico, sorry. I have a really weird order now. I've only now seen you. Go ahead, Federico.
Yes, thank you. In addition to the tensions that were mentioned, I wonder if you can talk, if you can recognize complicities between teaching criminological theory and teaching to research in criminology, in those cases that you were emprender in learn to research criminology.
Great, thanks. Anyone?
I think that in some way, at least in my case, this Federico is reflected in the different situation when you teach criminology in the undergraduate program of law or sociology, and you teach these theoretical courses, these 14 weeks courses, and the situation in the MA, in which you can do much more in order to introduce research aspects and interest, because you have 2.5 years with those students. So I think in the case of the undergraduate courses, the short answer will be it's not this. There is no a strong connection, but this is the case in the graduate program.
I think just partly some sort of methodology or research is integrally part of presenting the theories. So how you can't talk about the geographical Chicago whatever circles without talking about how they did it and how they came about. But then sometimes it's much harder to do, especially in a concentrated course. And I think we focus on that more in the research modules or in the research courses. But sometimes it is also part of the core criminological course.
Yeah, I guess the whole kind of discussion about trying to stay, focused. In this case, it always, if I try to do something like that, I go so far away from what I was saying that it takes me a long time to kind of go back. So I think that's probably the problem. Again, the limitations, I feel, of time and what you need to kind of teach, what you need to deliver. Andy, I see your hand up.
Hi, yeah, thanks. I suppose it was a comment I wanted to make, which goes back to something that Mojca said early on about the assignment being a place to expand for the students, and maybe thinking about how that fits in with some of the thinking about decolonizing. Because I think actually what we do when we're teaching, and that, again, as Mojca said, limited space that we actually get with the students. Like here, we do a 20 credit course, which counts as 200 hours work. 20 hours of that is what we've got in the classroom. And it's not all us talking at the student. We need to hear from them as well. So that's quite limited. And I think thinking of the assignment as a place of learning is really, really important. So I think the learning doesn't stop when we put down our pen on the last day of teaching. When the students go off and do the assignment, they're doing really, really important learning work. But I also think because they've got the tools to make sense of the world, and they've seen some examples of that, hopefully with some diversity, what that gives them the confidence to do is in the assignments, apply that to the examples that they care about, that speak to their own backstories, the places that they come from, the things that they've seen. And I think that's one of the important things where decolonizing helps. It creates space for the students to do that. It's a democratization. They bring in the cases. And in trying to apply the tools that we might have given them to make sense of the world, I think they're doing really, really important work in terms of honing those tools. So in my core teaching at master's level, that's what I'm trying to encourage students to do. Take these tools, go away, apply them to an example, and tell me if those tools don't work and why they don't work. And I think that's the way in which we'll really encourage students that come from a diverse range of backgrounds to help us democratize knowledge, make it better based on a wider range. The big problem with this, of course, is that, Milena, you can probably confirm this, when you look at our classes at the University of Edinburgh, we're missing a huge part because of the structural legacy of colonialism. We have very, very few African students in criminology. We have an increasing amount of South American students now, but that's even something of the last few years. So I guess one of the structural problems that we can't underestimate, and I don't think we can overcome as individual teachers, is who do we get in our classrooms?
Yeah, I agree. I confirm what Andy said. I already noticed the difference between while moving from Birmingham to Edinburgh. I mean, in Birmingham, we have kind of a traditionally good relationship with, for instance, Nigeria, and we get a lot of students from Nigeria, but it's very kind of patchy and very, it's sometimes difficult to understand the reason. I just want to kind of make another point that's connected to Andy's. I think it's also a great learning opportunity for us because we quite simply can learn from that. And I don't know, I think I've learned so much from just supervising the master's thesis. And that's also a valuable tool for us when we are talking about, and Milena made this point, I'm insecure, I don't know what to do. This is, I think, a great learning mechanism. Okay, any thoughts on Andy's question?
I think, yeah, I completely echo it. One of the assessments that we give too is just students get to own their own project at undergraduate level. And within tutorials, we kind of do an hour of traditional tutorial, but also an hour supporting them through that project. They can either kind of choose a criminal or deviant act and look at it from a historical perspective within one country, or alternatively, look at it where it's legal in one country and illegal in another country. We pair them together in groups, and then we support them and they do a presentation at the end of that. And it's just so amazing to watch them get that ownership, quite frankly, of that project, become experts within that 12-week process, and at the end of it, educate their fellow students. I know from my perspective, I've learned so much from that, just from examples that I would never have had the time to explore, quite frankly, with the students. So it's something that we've done for years, and I hope we continue to do it.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think that's a great point. Sorry, there was, so Margaret says, I guess, continued to the Andy's question, lived experience, autoethnographic research. And the honor says, yes, Margaret, had hopefully some field trips, obviously, when that's possible again. we might have to wait a bit longer. Okay, other questions or comments? Mojca, I feel like you wanted to say something maybe like 10 minutes ago.
No, it's fine. It's fine. Yeah, I just wanted to mention this because I forgot earlier. When you said how we choose the topics that we're going to discuss in the courses, I don't know whether that's true in all your different contexts, but in Slovenia we have, there's typically several lecturers assigned to one course. So you're not teaching the course on your own. You have one or two colleagues that teach it together with you. And I feel that is a good way of bringing different viewpoints into the conversation on criminology, because we all have different focuses, of course, in our research, in our academic interests. But I think having different people teach this line of thought helps students understand that there are different perspectives on the same issue. And I think, I guess we're kind of similar, but still different enough to offer this kind of different views. And I think that can be helpful as well. So it's a bit less than we talked earlier with including people from different places around the world, but already including different people might be helpful.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that's what we do in Edinburgh. I guess I'm not sure whether that's a kind of a wider UK attempt to get people to co-teach, which makes a lot of sense. Margaret's asking, do you invite cross-discipline conversations? Margaret, would that be kind of inviting people from other faculties, other departments?
Other faculties.
Yeah.
I know I am much older than all of you, so I've been living with murder since I was 16. And I do many different things, but I'm a poet as well as a prof, etc. But I have seen other profs. So you mentioned law and sociology, which are crucial. Philosophy is also quite significant, and also English. I mean, literature, it doesn't have to be English, but I'm saying literature because those are the places as well. You know, somebody mentioned, I think, Turgenev, but I mean, these are places where these conversations about criminology, they're there. We live their lived experience, you know. So that is what I was wondering if perhaps you have done that, or perhaps you might thought of doing that to bring like people from different departments, if you will.
I know we definitely do within our kind of global crime master's course. So we have people from political science, well, SPS, I guess, social political science.
Yes.
Andy, correct me if, but we tend to do that. But I'm kind of thinking, again, you might be even thinking of a wider, as you say, literature.
Yes.
And so it's not, obviously, if you're involving people from political science or international relations, that's already great, but it is linked in a way.
And one other thing, elders as well. I apologize. I mean, I've been to prisons across this country. I've been to Pollsmoor prison. I've been to victim centers, etc. And one thing in Canada, in a lot of the prisons and in the healing centers for inmates as well as for those that have been victimized, we often have elders as well.
All right.
So I mean,
again, that's very kind of context specific.
Yes.
You have opportunities which are there, I mean, in that context. Did you, any of the guests, do you happen to do things like that? I mean, I very often feel like I would invite someone from psychology to deliver some sessions that I teach, or someone else, because it just feels, again, going back to the beginning, we're not really, none of us are really super equipped to deal interdisciplinary subjects such as criminology. Mojca.
I've had sorry, Maximo. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, please. Mojca.
I've just had, so one of my PhD students is a linguist, and he's doing his dissertation on a cross between criminology and linguistics. So I've had him come in as a linguist and explain why language matters and how it matters and so on. And that was really helpful. I mean, it can be really hard as well, because you as a specialist in your field want to go into the specifics, and you know, linguistic specifics don't really fare well with law students. But when you strike a balance, it is really, really helpful and can be really good.
Yeah. I just connected to what you've just said, and is kind of connected me. No, we do have lawyers, IR people, criminologists, but I think a really important point is that we have practitioners as well. So we have people from the police, from the prosecution, judges, I guess not, but we have people who are practicing the things that we are teaching. Sorry, Maximo.
No, yes, I was about to say something similar, that particularly in our MA, we have people with very different backgrounds. We have people who have undergraduate degrees in sociology or social work or psychology, but also lawyers. And in relation to lawyers particularly, we have people working in the prosecution office or the public defender's office or the judges. And that's a very interesting mix in a way, and one of the sources of, let's say, lively debate between the students. And in relation to the professors of the different courses in our MA, since criminology here do not have a process of institutionalization like the one in the UK, we don't have criminologists in properly speaking, in terms of, people who have done an undergraduate degree in criminology. Yep. Criminology is only taught in some MA programs, and as I previously said, we don't have PhDs programs in criminology yet. So the people who teach in our MA program, some of them define themselves as criminologists, but some of them also define themselves as sociologists or criminal law professors. So we have some also level of variation in that sense.
Okay, thank you. I'm just going to presume that the next question comes from Janos. I'm going to presume that's the proper pronunciation.
Yes, Janos. Hello. Thank you. No, thank you for this. And I just wanted to add in to what Maximo says, that it's quite interesting that, for example, I participated a few months ago to a conference on obfuscation, and it's really about, to put it very simply, cybercrime. But the point was that they would not have agreed at all in what I was trying to tell them. So there was this whole field of people who were sociologists, but also computer scientists, and that their perception of what is crime online was completely different from what mine was, or in general some cybercrime specialists would say. So again, this is the important side of this kind of trying to do some kind of interdisciplinary teaching to students, is that actually different fields are going to say different things about crime and criminology. You talk to an anthropologist, you ask Pierre Castres, what does it mean to be, what is crime? And he would tell you, look at what certain tribes are doing, and society against the state. So actually we can have societies having completely different perception of state, or completely different perceptions of crime. So this is quite an important side. And I don't think anybody mentioned philosophy, but even have philosophers actually telling you about what is crime, well, there we go. We have one philosopher, maybe Margot, she was pointing, I saw her. Or poetry or literature. So these are all different aspects that perhaps are going to confuse students even more, but maybe that's the good thing. I mean, that's kind of the ideal, to get them out of the classroom with a headache more than answers.
Yeah. I think, again, this goes back to this kind of, we want to do so many things and we have so many ideas. Obviously, there's always kind of less time. Yes, I think Andy makes a good point, and I do that as well. I'm not sure if this resonates with you, that at the MSc level, so at the master's level, we already have students coming from various disciplines. That's tricky sometimes if you're teaching, if you kind of assume that everyone knows what an international convention is and how they get adopted and how they get implemented, and then people will be like, you have to explain that. So there's a level of trying to find the common grounds and try to put everyone at the same level. But that's a source of, I think, a lot of there's a lot of benefit in having people from various disciplines in the same room, and you can kind of see them throughout the year collaborating better and better and being more secure about what they know. So I think that's probably one of the kind of most valuable things about teaching at the master's level, because people are already very confident about their knowledge and want to communicate. Okay, do we have any other questions? We have a cat, Francesca. I don't see a hand up. Does anyone have any questions or any comments? Margaret has a question. I see a non-virtual hand up.
You know, I do wonder, because when I've gone to several of these, you know, UBC and all these universities, I've been invited often by criminologists who say restorative justice is something that is not considered. And I will say, I've written a new model of restorative justice. It was published just a few years ago. It's called Sabona. That's number one. I just wanted to, I have two questions. One is, do you bring restorative justice? Do you bring Sabona under that umbrella? And the other thing is Umidjon, is that how am I pronouncing it correctly? I really appreciated your point in terms of, and I think Mojca, Mojca, I apologize. Mojca, we had there was a bit of a conversation about theory and practicality. And I will tell you, I've spent a lot of time with lawyers, people going to study law, generally in undergrad, and people studying to be police officers, you know, undergrad. And when the restorative justice conversation is brought in, there is a mix. I mean, there's kind of a more, it's more tangible. Like, I'm not just studying this effing theory stuff, just, you know, yay, because I got a brain and I got cash to do this. But especially the young people, mainly young people studying to be police officers, they see a link. They see how the theory actually can help them in their career, their job. So I apologize if I'm not saying it clearly enough, but your question was poignant, profound, and important in terms of theory and practicality. And I teach my students, and I live by the feminist mantra: the personal, the professional, and the political are siblings. So I think it is a fair and an important thing to keep in mind as professors, as poets, whatever the hell else we do. So thank you for that point.
Yeah, goes back to a lot of the things that we've discussed, I think, in the beginning, and kind of how we conceive of what we teach is in relation to who we teach as well, and what we want to instill in them, if you will.
Sure.
Okay, Andy's thanking us. I thought Andy was closing the session, but he's just leaving. Thank you, Andy. Okay, great. Any other thoughts or comments, questions? Okay, then I will thank you all 5 minutes before the end. Thanks to our guests again, especially, to the guests and the participants equally. I thought this was a very fruitful conversation. I hope there will be more forums to kind of continue with this kind of conversation as well. So I wish you a pleasant day or evening or morning, wherever you might be. And thanks again for coming.